Advanced Business Communications for Data Storytellers. I guess this is episode 14, 15.
Arbitrary number.
We're not keeping track.
Yeah.
Who cares even? We arrived at one of the pivotal moments of the entire series. So we're going to talk about visual storytelling. Now, you and I remember when we did the episode on entry-level escape, and all those listeners who have not listened to that one, listen to it. It's great. Even if you're an aspiring leader or a leader and you're trying to get the most out of your team, both that episode and the book, amazing content. Go get the book today on Amazon, Entry-Level Escape from Dave Coughlin. And the PowerPoint aspect was quite important there because it's one of those complementary skills that in a corporate setting, it's just huge ROI. So whatever time and energy you invest in that, especially if you're in data science, as a complementary skill to your domain knowledge, it's one of the ultimate force multipliers. So I hope I've sold it well just going into this. I guess we are going to uncover a bunch of content that you built over the years, both in your role, but also even for entry-level escape, right?
Yeah, this is sort of like a magnum opus masterclass that it's an excerpt that I've never released commercially. It's one that I keep getting better at it, keep testing it with new colleagues. And this is the first time it's kind of being made public. And what this is essentially a masterclass on PowerPoint and presenting your PowerPoint. And the genesis of this was, let's recall the context, right? Because it's like, hey, wait a minute, we had 14 episodes or whatever of, analyzing great persuaders, doing a synthesis where you're in meetings, whether you're in a subordinate or a superordinate role, and now I'm getting a random PowerPoint lesson. What the hell's going on? This is the asynchronous part of the advanced communications, right? And so what does asynchronous mean? Asynchronous means that you have time to prepare the content before the meeting or before the interaction. So this session and however else we need, probably just one more after this, is going to cover making PowerPoint slides and writing better emails. And you're going to get a little bit of that email writing in here too, but we'll have a separate one for that. And why is this so important? Like you said, this PowerPoint deck, the slide is like the currency in the vast majority of corporate organizations. I think, every week on LinkedIn, you'll see somebody trot out at Amazon, they don't use PowerPoint. And then everyone in the comments is like, we should do that too. And then immediately people go back to working on decks. So I don't think there's a way to get rid of it. And in my own career, in the careers of people that I've mentored, even senior people, I was an executive director. I had directors that report to me. I'm a vice president now. I have directors that report to me. You have these stumbling portion. Sorry, let me rephrase that. There's a stumble or there's a difficulty in bridging that chasm to being able to create PowerPoint content that works. And it becomes a massive time sink, and it makes a lot of people just kind of dread it. But as you'll see in a couple slides, it's inevitable that it will become a progressively larger portion of your day. And so this masterclass on asynchronous content creation is designed to make it gentle, painless, and fast, because you've got way more important things to do than make slides. So that's kind of my long-winded intro, but that's why we're here. That's what we're talking about, right? This is asynchronous. This is probably 90% of the asynchronous content you're going to create, because this is the thing that you use in the meetings.
And on my end, I never really understood all the hate towards PowerPoint. I know it can be done badly, and it often, maybe even most often, it is done badly. And it can be offset by, great speech and charismatic communication. But what we're going to look at is really and correct me if I'm wrong, even when we spoke about it before, really the deep principles of storytelling from a visual perspective, right? And it's a very unique species of that because you have text, but also other type of visuals. So
exactly.
I'm very interested in even, I think we spoke about that before too, maybe during the ABCDS episodes, like copywriting itself.
Yep.
It's a fascinating journey to take because it will lead you into areas that you did not even know that existed. I mean, I was always very intuitive. For example, when I was writing emails, I know that this whole idea of the attention economy, when someone glances at your email, immediately it needs to be like easily readable. So making it aesthetically pleasing is an incredibly practical thing to do. So visual spacing, for example, is not something that's being often talked about, but for example, it is at the heart of copywriting. Even in these principles will be even strongly pronounced here in the PowerPoint journey. So without further ado, sir, I'm very excited to dive in.
Let's get right into it. So what we're going to do, we're going to do an overview, right? So quick preview of what's in here. We're going to talk about the context, PowerPoint itself, better presentation mechanics, and then next best action so that people can put this to the test right away. So the training has 3 primary goals. So the first is to get people better at PowerPoint, like physically open up PowerPoint and just crush it, period, full stop, right? And I'm going to make a case for why you need to learn how to do this, give you the tools to be that wizard that you always wanted to be. And then finally, I'm going to provide some perspective on things that have helped me move from a back office to front office and be very effective in the front office. Whether I'm doing public speaking to a ballroom, speaking to a board of directors, speaking to a CEO, that was not a easy transition, but it can be made a lot easier. Like I'm dropping the ladder behind me. I'm not pulling it up as I climb up. That's how I always try to do it. So make the good slides and present them effectively. That's really what we're going to do today. So here's the unfortunate thing that's forcing everybody into this training and why I think so many analytic professionals kind of crack their molars whenever they hear the word PowerPoint. As you move up, the analytics goes down and the PowerPoint goes up, right? And so this is a not literal, like somebody might be like, well, I'm a director and I still do lots of modeling. That's awesome. Great. That's all I know. But by and large, you see this transition. It happens around to the manager level where you stop doing technical work and you start doing a lot more of this kind of work. Okay. It just becomes more of the job. But as you move up, there's a lot more stuff that you have to do. You have to do performance reviews. You have to do strategy sessions. You have to manage progressively more ornery stakeholders. Thank you for that, ABCDS training that we now have, right? But the reason that this comes at a particularly difficult time for a lot of people is that your total scope of responsibility goes up and the expectations of your PowerPoint goes up, and there isn't this like really clean transition. And so as I was thinking about how to right size this training, I said, we got to avoid diminishing returns. Pretty much everybody should know what diminishing returns looks like. But if you think about this curve, and you'll notice how concave it is, you have the mastery level of a skill and the time and effort that you have to put into it. It doesn't take very long to get to the 60th percentile to be better than the average person. I mean, look around at everybody at your organization, look around at everybody, whether it's PowerPoint, whether it's analytics, whatever it is, like it's not that difficult to become above average, right? But it can be very difficult to become elite, right? And you and I talk about basketball a lot. It's actually not that difficult to be like the best player in your beer league or to just be an above average player in your beer league. But very, very few people get to go to the NBA, right? And then there's only one Kobe Bryant, right? So
thank you for adding that.
Yeah,
save me the effort. Yeah,
I know we needed it, right? And so that's basically diminishing returns in a nutshell. And as with anything complementary, 60% is the target. That's the bullseye. Now, if you love this and you're like, oh my God, I can't get enough PowerPoint, I want to be the next, great PowerPoint wizard, public speaker, or hey, I bet I could do a better job of this than Dave, by all means, keep going past 60. But if you're just trying to be a good enough PowerPointer so that you can excel at the other aspects of the leadership job, this is where you want to stop. And this is where I'm going to get you with this training. How about yourself? I mean, you've been, less of a corporate PowerPoint monkey, more of a, but you're a man of many skills. I mean, how does this resonate with you about like aiming for 60 when it's complementary to your core role?
Absolutely. So, especially if we think about, I do look at being a corporate professional in a lot of ways, as you said it too, as a professional athlete. So that's how you earn your keep, but also that's what you're invested in. Ideally, that's what you're also passionate about and you love, right? But even most NBA players, if you think about it, most of them would be players that you can use them in all kinds of situations, right? So they need to be a good enough shooter, a good enough defender. And there are very few people who would be like very concrete role players, right? Okay, this guy can't do anything, but he's the best 3-point shooter, right? Mm-hmm. But all around, what you're looking for is to be effective. Plus, I think with shooting for the 60th percentile in everything, you also want to keep your options open for what you want to do next. So
that's a good point. Yeah,
you don't want to invest too much time into one particular thing. That's why, again, not to disparage any other training that's out there, right? But I've heard stories about PowerPoint training that takes like an ungodly amount of hours, and people are selling it for a lot of money. And I know that that same amount of work, the returns probably could have been done with like 20% of the effort that would have given you 80% of the actual applicable benefits and skills. So as with everything, I'm a huge fan of the 80-20. And I guess, especially with this kind of stuff, visual storytelling, PowerPoint. Now, if you're a graphic designer, if you are a visual marketer, that's a different situation. Because then that's your specialty. Then that's your craft. As a data science professional, it just happens to be one of the greatest opportunities and one of the most powerful force multipliers that you can have for your skills. But I completely agree with you. And also probably shooting for the 60th percentile, you can really become good and very good even. Now, whether you need to be the best in the world, probably not. So I agree with you 100%.
Right on, man. Right on. And so we're going to get everybody that's paying attention to the 60th percentile, maybe higher. They might overshoot a little bit, but we're going to do our best to avoid diminishing returns. So here we go. So this is the meat of the discussion. So we're going to talk about making individually aesthetic slides. Okay, and this is the dirtiest, filthiest secret in PowerPoint. There's really only 4 archetypal slides, and once I show you what they look like, then you can just build off of that. You might have 12 by the time you're done, but you just start to reuse them. And then they're like, wow, how is Dave able to make 4 decks in 3 minutes? It's like, yeah, because I'm just like zipping through these templates. Then once we've got individually good slides, we'll talk about how to assemble them into a deck that works. Okay. Then to go even further, if you've ever had to deal with consultants, and I'm a recovering consultant myself, we just rapidly generate slides. Okay, how are we able to generate them so fast? Right? It's like, hey, I'll see you tomorrow. Show up the next day, 50 slides. How did you do that? Because we have techniques to rapidly turn through content so that you're only exerting yourself when it makes sense to do so. And then finally, we'll talk about how to give exciting presentations so you get more invitations to present more. All right? So most companies have a template. I know you have one because you shared it with me when we were prepping for my case study on the movie theaters. But here we go. This is a slide. This is our basic bare bones slide. And here's the anatomy of that slide, so we could just refer to things. So upper left corner, breadcrumb. Breadcrumb is optional. Breadcrumb just says, here's how far along you are in either the chapter or the deck. I'm not using breadcrumbs in this deck because I have these that lime green ribbon at the top, but in my corporate decks, I typically have a breadcrumb. Then you've got a call out top right corner. That's great real estate to throw something like for discussion, work in progress. So you don't have to put like a big ugly watermark across the whole page. Then you get your headline, not optional, probably single most important thing on the slide. Okay. What's the point you're trying to make? 2 lines or fewer. Then you've got the content. That's the physical bulk of the slide, albeit it's way less important than the headline. Then you've got a tombstone. Tombstone is a nice little closer to your slide so that it helps either facilitate transition or just add emphasis and gravity to something. Again, optional. Not every slide has one. And then footnotes, data pulled as of X. Here are a couple of caveats. This only works on days ending in K. Wait a minute, they all end in Y. As caveat as needed. So that is your rough slide. If you learn the anatomy of a slide, you can refer to it when you're doing editing, but it also helps you think about the physical space that you're occupying. And then boom, there's a tombstone, right? So, but what is the most important rule of anatomy? Anything on the slide has to support the message on the slide. Okay? The biggest trap that people hit first time into PowerPoint as a heavy PowerPoint user, overly populating their slides and potentially trying to make too many points on a single slide. So if it's on the slide, it's got to support the message. Otherwise, do not put it on the slide. All right, so here we go. The archetypes, okay? Because when you're making PowerPoint, you have a mission or you have goals. And so here are the goals, right? You're going to make lists. You're going to share the lists. You're going to present the lists. Okay. You're going to illustrate a process. You're going to share an analysis. So you're going to showcase some ideas. Before I go any further, Laz, any archetypes or scenarios that come to mind that don't fit into those 4 categories?
So I guess telling a story in a way. So you remember when I told you about the Pizza Cuccia thing, and I spread that horrible misinformation about it being having originated in Renaissance Italy, while it's something Japanese. So that moment, so that's a powerful storytelling technique. Pizza Cuccia, essentially, I think it's 18 slides, 18 images, and that's it. So it's basically no text or very minimal text. My favorite on that, if I want to tell a story, it would be an image and a headline. That's it. Image, headline, image, headline, image, headline. I guess it is kind of like showcasing an idea, right? But at the same time, you are conveying a narrative too. So maybe that's an archetype, but maybe you have a different take on that.
I mean, how would you respond to the narrative is the sum of the individual slides and not necessarily the job of any one slide?
Got it.
How would you feel about that assertion? I want to make that assertion to you right now.
So in that sense, now I embrace that assertion. So to focus on one particular slide, then I guess in the case of a Pizza Cuccia, it's almost like describing a scene. Now we're getting into territory where I guess in a corporate slide, often it would be share analysis, showcase an idea, illustrate the process, right? There is a time and place for an anecdote. So I guess kind of like talking through a scene. It's kind of like a shot in a movie, right? It's called a shot. It's okay. It's an image. Maybe that's a different archetype right there. It's okay. It can be.
I could see that. Yeah, maybe we need a 5th one for like add color or like rapport building. It's not quite because showcase an idea is probably too open ended. So, but what you're talking about, where it's like, where would you put the anecdote that sort of breaks the ice or sets the stage? And I'm not entirely sure it's going to fit in neatly into one of those 4. So
and Oren Klaff is huge on that in terms of again, Oren Klaff, for those who haven't listened to that episode, venture capitalist, so selling business ideas and getting investors to put big money into those ideas. You have 18 minutes. Every single sentence counts. You get one chance. One bullet in the chamber needs to find a home. And in that, as he presents that idea, he loves cutting to an anecdote and a story in an unexpected way. And that's like shifting gears from whatever you're conveying. It's not about how the numbers work out. It's not about, the bottom line. It's definitely not sharing an analysis, but you drop into an anecdote, which has all kinds of purposes, including putting the conversation in a hot cognitive track, as we spoke about it before.
Yep. Get some emotions going. Yep. And so appreciate that. I don't have any content for that fifth one, but I do have content for these four. And when you do these four are going to get you the overwhelming majority of your corporate scenarios, right? And so if you can learn PowerPoint to make a list or illustrate a process or share an analysis or showcase an idea, you are going to be able to do what you got to do and get it done. Okay. Now, these are just ideas. This is a framework, right? This is how I make slides. You may look at this and be like, I have an idea how I would rather do it. And that's great. People tuning into this, same idea. But it's sort of this, I always fall back on rules are, it's something like rules are the handcuff of the fool, but the direction for the wise or something like that. So don't handcuff yourself, but if in the absence of direction, in the absence of a plan, you could always fall back on these guys. And so let's dig in, right?
And also just a quick note on that,
sure.
right? So, because I love that idea. And I think mastery is when you master something, then you have full autonomy to freely move around with that knowledge. But you earn your way to that autonomy by being shackled to the rules first so that you can hone that skill. So it's definitely a pathway to freedom.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, that like effortless competence. I think we've talked about that before. So very, very basic archetype lists. Okay, you might have an agenda. You might just have bullet points floating in space that you just want to talk to. They kind of remind you to what you want to say in your voiceover. So we've got the most basic, absolutely the most basic. You just create a rectangle object. You start enumerating, 1 period, bang, write it all out. Microsoft will figure out the formatting for you. If you're using Google Sheets, the auto formatting on lists is horrible. You're going to have to manually manipulate it every time. When you're putting bullets like this, there's a setting of it's like usually a couple clicks deep where you can put a space before the bullet. I would use 6 on Microsoft, 3 on Google. It gives you a little bit of breathing room between your bullets like this one has. And then avoid one-word wrapping like it's the plague. So bullet 1 here is an example of a one-word wrap that I forced into the slide to give you an example of like how unpleasant that can be to look at. It's one of those things where like you probably never noticed it until I pointed it out. Now that I will, you will never be able to unnotice it. And now I share that curse of knowledge with everybody doing it. Now, that's your basic list. Now here's a fancy list. Okay, here we go. All I do here is I take a shape object. I like to use a chevron and then squash it down to a triangle. And that becomes my bullet. And then I have a rectangle right next to it that I use to put the content. Now, a little hack in PowerPoint and in Google, you can just clone the original shape that like with the triangles here. And then you can just click change shape rectangle and it'll keep the height the same size. You don't have to worry about resizing it. And then you can just drag it to make it as wide as you need. All right. Then group them together. So that, triangle 1 and its corresponding rectangle where the bullet is are grouped as a single object. So that's Control-Alt-G on Google, Control-G on Microsoft. And that allows them to move as single entities. Very, very important for when you try to distribute and align all of that fun stuff. Okay. And then once you've built your first one, Control Shift, click and drag, you'll just clone it every time you want to clone it. So when I did this slide myself to prep, I built that bullet 1 and then Control Shift, click, drag, and then I made the other ones very, very quickly, very, very easily. And now, here's the thing. The list is basically the same thing, except I'm using animations to control the reveal as I just did in real time. I'm talking to you, using animation. That way you can only ever see one item on my list at a time. You can't read ahead. I control the discussion. Very, very powerful from a storytelling point of view, from a persuasion point of view, where you know what's coming, they don't, but you can control where they're looking. All right? This is very simple, but even just having that in your back pocket, I'm going to have a triangle, rectangle, merge them together. It's a visually interesting format. It allows you to use the animations. You've already leveled up your PowerPoint game, and we're just getting started. Some people like to use circles. I just happen to like triangles because the triangle points to the text. That's why I use triangle.
So a few thoughts on that, because even the line break and the one word in one line. So these are the kinds of things that before this was actually written down to me, for example, in that copywriting course that I did, I always knew it and I always knew about it and I always was applying it, but I was very happy to see that, no, this is actually something that's good form. And I guess that when you build a slide, again, you need to focus on making sure that you don't get into the diminishing returns area. But I know that, for example, for decks, sales decks, when you have a product and there's obviously customization for different audiences and all that. But if there's a core product, I'm very, very, I put a lot of effort into making sure that, for example, each of the bullet points are the same amount of lines, for example. Right? Or there is a cadence of, let's say, if we have 2 lines, but one needs to be 3 lines, then I want to make sure that it's kind of like a poem, right? That, okay, then the next one will be 2 and the other 3. This is obsessive, right? So I'm not advising people to do that, but I think the principle stands that looking at something and it being organized in a visually pleasing way, it does draw attention. And that leads to my next point, that all you want to do also with the PowerPoint is, and even with storytelling, is you are controlling and directing the audience's attention. So what you mentioned about kind of hiding information until the reveal, that I think the importance of that cannot be overstated, because one of the pitfalls is that you put the slide on and, well, if you present something to me, even if you don't tell me that, hey, read the slides, well, that's the implicit message, right? It's like, I'm putting this on so that you can read it.
Right.
So when you start talking and people are kind of reading, people can't listen and read at the same time.
Right.
So you want to put that effort in and make sure that you don't shortchange your audience and get them to miss out on your message by making sure that you can control that attention step by step. So very powerful.
All right. Now, this is I cooked this template up myself. It is a way to illustrate a process. It works great as long as you've got roughly, I would say, 6 or fewer steps. Okay, so it could be 6 or fewer months, quarters, years, days. But you're not going to want to use this for 30 days or 30 months or 30 weeks, because you're going to end up with things that are too small. But this is the chevron fishbone template. So this is very easy to get started. You get that chevron shape, you draw it across the top, okay? You then shift, click, and drag it to turn it into the arrow. I think it's the true chevron that has that fishtail, and I'll show you one in a second. And that's the basis of this, of going across the top. So you have the chevron, or the pentagon, and then the chevron's going to the right, which I'll show you what that looks like right now. But then you get to step 2. Step 2 is very tedious. So what step 2 is, you can't see it here because it's got a transparent color. There's a rectangle directly under the chevron or directly under the pentagon that is perfectly sized to be as wide as that flat edge. So it's not as wide as the tip to tip. Okay, and the both slides and PowerPoint are going to try to snap it to the tip. So you have to I usually have to zoom in way in 400% to perfectly size it. But once you do, remember we talked about in the last slide, you can group it and you can clone it. So you only have to do it once, but it can be annoying to have to zoom way in and do that kind of a wiggle there. But once you get it just right, you have a very nice natural shape that's hidden to the audience, but it looks pretty good. And so then you just have to clone it, and like I said, and then just populate it. So, here you can see I'm building it in real time. Those dotted lines are independent lines that are between those rectangles, those hidden rectangles. And then I just use the distribute tool to space them accordingly. And so that's basically what you have. Okay. Now, what I used to do is I used to actually put a border around the rectangles to try to match the colors of the chevrons. But what I found was having like two borders relatively close together was creating a visual effect that I'll talk about later on. It's like an occipital vibration, which is basically your eyes start to shape, very like micro tremors, and it can actually be uncomfortable. So I've evolved my thinking to this, which is just a single line that's kind of free floating, but I use the distribute tool to sort of position. Okay. And then my last point on this is that use of color, where it goes from light to dark, is a fairly low effort but high impact way to impose progression. Right? I'm not just moving forward through time. Something's happening, and I think it's a easy to overlook thing. I could have made all the chevrons the same shade of green, and it would still work. Don't get me wrong, it still works. But having it get darker as you go left to right, it does this thing to like the brain that like you're not explicitly saying it, but you can feel like, oh, we're moving towards something. And so I probably use this particular archetype once a deck for years because I'm almost always talking about next steps, talking about a project. And I think this is more fun to look at than like a Gantt chart or a like Visio diagram. Like that. What do you guys use at TDS for like next steps or for planning things out?
So actually, with this one, I remember when you was presenting the root beer example, and I saw your deck. I really liked this, and I liked it for multiple reasons, because it's not just that it conveys the progression, but think about it this way: when you send even an email, you're looking to break things up as much as possible. And let's say if you have one line or one phrase bolded, that actually helps it's easier to look at it and it's easier to read. It's somehow, with that distinction, it draws the eye in a way that just makes it easier to process the information. So as opposed to, let's say, if those greens were the same color, it's not only that it doesn't convey that kind of progression that it does this way, but it would be, I think, a harder slide to look at.
That's a good point. Yeah, I agree.
And that's very important. Now, with progression at TDS, I always like a timeline, for example. So when we do progressions, I always try to find a way to convey like time passing. Right. So I love personally like actual timelines. It's not always applicable. Right. But similar to this, and I really liked it because when again I sent you our kind of template, which was just a very basic template, and you really enriched it with this. I do remember noticing that.
And on that note, for like the hardcore, like the nitty gritty timeline, or when you just have more units of time, I have this one. Now this is built in PowerPoint. It's essentially a Gantt chart. But what's nice about this is it only uses native to PowerPoint objects. So you don't have to worry about plugins. You don't have to worry about, if you have some sort of connection and then the connection gets broken because you emailed it and Microsoft's like, oh, I forgot what you were talking about. This is all native to PowerPoint. And so all this is a table object, which is up in the ribbon. And I manipulate the column sizes to cover what I need. In this case, just to, again, illustrate how I use them in real life. I've got month level, and then it breaks into quarter levels as I get further out. You don't have to use the same color. I'm using that like cyan blue for the discrete, like here's what's happening. I've got that green shade for just the evergreen. It's going to constantly happen. So like I want you to know it's always happening, but it's not really the most important thing. And then red is such a powerful color, immediately draws the eyes. Those are the two major events. And I've embellished things like this before. I might have a bar going across the far right to say, we're in the post-launch world or things like that. But I use this a lot when doing project plans that require more granularity. And so this is a great way to just, again, use the things that are in PowerPoint. Again, it has limits. Like, you're probably not going to want to do more than 30 tasks vertically. You're probably not going to want to have more than, say, 20 units of time going horizontally. But if it's an in-between this and like MS Project, for example, which gives you full power and it can be as large as you want, but that's another complementary skill. This is just inbuilt to PowerPoint. And I find I've had very few projects where I couldn't fit it into a single slide. I think, how does this match up to like the way you guys do timelines?
Yeah, so it's I like this when we do the timelines. Yeah. It's also I go for like very, very simple usually, right? But this is also when you want to convey something more complex. This is great. I had a question about this that you know how when you let's say with the bullet points you reveal one at a time.
Yep.
How easy or difficult it is for this to be similar, of each of those boxes appearing progressively.
So the way you would do it is you would put a rectangle object over each row or each group of rows that you want to reveal together. And just like there's a fade in animation, there's a fade out or an exit animation. So actually, I'll show you right now. I use the exit animation here. So on this page, that green text is covered by a gray box. And so I have on click, get rid of the gray box. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you can use that the same way, because the table object is a singular object. You can't do a progressive reveal, but you can. This is one of those like advanced tricks where you take an object and sort of use it for what it's not intended to create an effect. Mm-hmm. But that's how you would do a row level reveal or something.
And that's like the easiest way, because you see, I was thinking, do you need to create like multiple slides and each will be its own to kind of give that.
I used to do that, and then I figured out how to use animations to get rid of that.
Yeah, that's super powerful, and that's a good point of when you get to that level, when you can earn that level of proficiency, then you can do things like that, and it sounds quick too. Like it's
because again, you're just cloning objects, and if it's animated, it'll automatically increment the animation, so you just have to do it once. Now, it can make editing a pain in the neck, because if like something moves or if you break your animation, you might have to wipe the slide, start over again with the animation building. But again, these are minor things compared to, let's say you were going to do your fake animation by having 8 slides or whatever. Now you have 8 points of failure instead of 1 slide with a little bit of editing. So again, in the long run, it makes the cost of ownership a lot lower too. All right, now here's the one that does the most work. This is our heaviest hitter. This is the analytic archetype. This layout is the one, this is my bread and butter layout. I use this probably 4 times a day. Okay, so what is it at its heart? You have an analytic insight or something that's visually interesting. It's not just analytics. I'll also use this for like if I'm releasing a product, or if I'm releasing a feature, if I want to talk about a feature inside of a product, like we use Salesforce. Hey, I just put something in Salesforce. Screenshot, this is what it's going to look like. Annotations using the PowerPoint objects. This is like, oh, look, it does this. And then right-hand side, commentary, analysis, whatever you want it to be. So this one here on the left is a ginned up example for you. So we've got just sales per month, and it jumped in the second half of the year. Why did it jump? I don't know. Do you know? Nobody knows. We're going to talk about that in this hypothetical example. But I want to point out how that left-hand side was built, the principles behind it. The picture has a headline. What is that headline saying? Sales increased dramatically from June to July and kept going for the rest of the year. Okay. What is it not saying? Laz, what does that headline not say? What combination of words is not in that headline?
For example, like percentage increases from?
Nope.
No?
Nope. What's the worst possible headline I could have put there instead?
We had like a 500% increase. Again, maybe I'm fixated on the percentage idea.
You're close. No, so the worst possible headline: sales per month.
Oh, got it. Got it. It does not tell the story. It does not convey the message.
Who cares?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Somewhere in this series, I'm sure we've had the dreaded "so what" pop up. You want to avoid "so what"? Write better headlines. Seriously, that is the armor against the dreaded "so what." So sales increased dramatically from June to July. What does that mean? Okay, I've already told you it's sales per month. It's in there. Right? But I'm also giving you the key point. It jumped and kept going. Okay? Then underneath that, if you need like some fine print, you can have the fine print, data as of, whatever, right? So this is the big architect. This is the one. Okay? If you're going to master any of these, this is the one to master. Okay? I'm using call outs. Those dotted red boxes with the red text, those are my call outs. Now this is a little heavy handed because I've got two big ones that basically occupy the entire slide. I could have had just one call out, which just shows where that change happened. It was like 10% per month, and then it became 50% per month. Could have been a simpler call out. But the point is, when you're building an infographic, use callouts to make it 100% unambiguous what you want them to look at. Don't leave it to chance. And don't overly embellish your infographics. You don't need an infographic that's got like sales on one axis, number of sales reps on the other axis, temperature on the third axis. Then you're going to use like shape and color and orientation. And like you don't want to convey like one point, one slide, one picture, right? So we had sales and they jumped. That's my point. And if I want to talk about something else, I'll do it on another slide. Clean, unambiguous charts are worth a skadillion dollars, dude. And they will save so much time, so much pain. The other thing I'll talk about is this chart has no junk on it. It tells you the month, it tells you the sale, and the bars are very easy to differentiate. Period. Full stop. I don't have an axis. I don't need it. You don't need to know where 5,000 is vertically because you know that bar to the far right is 5,000 points. The axis is pointless. Those like secondary lines that go horizontally to help you go, okay, 3,000. Okay, that one's 3,000. No, you don't need that. Get rid of those because you have the numbers inside the bars. If I was going to be a huge stickler, I would use horizontal bars instead of vertical bars, but I'll keep it. That requires like organizational change management. Apparently, people just love their bars vertical for some reason. But this is the crux of that analytic object to the left. Okay, clear, evocative, unambiguous headline tells you exactly what you want to say. No chart junk. Use call outs. 1 point, one graphic, one slide. The only thing I'll add is there's debate, very valid debate on whether you should have the picture on the left or the picture on the right. Okay? The debate can be summarized as follows. Because the picture is naturally more interesting, you should put it on the right because it will kind of force them to go through your text to get to the picture. The alternative is people ignore things that are to the right. They tend to put primacy on things to the left. The picture is probably more important, so put it on the left. So you've got precious real estate versus make them work for their dessert, so to speak. I fall on the real estate management side of things. My former boss fell on the make them work for their dessert side of things. Neither is wrong. It's just this is more of a stylistic thing.
I remember we had this conversation in a previous episode,
Yeah.
and I'm a proud convert to your side of the argument. I guess my model got updated with that. It's not like it was a hill that I was about to die on, right? But it made sense to me, and especially with the idea of, look, what's important and what do you actually want them to look at? But it's a great point that no, you can actually direct their attention so that they end up reading. So it's like, haha, I kind of got, it's like a got you moment. But no, actually the picture is way more important anyways. And just to spend a second on the headline idea. So it's great because I couldn't figure it out, like what you're looking for. But when you said, oh yeah, monthly sales, like how inferior that is compared to sales increased dramatically from June to July, and it kept going for the rest of the year. Well, one is the monthly sales is abstract and very passive. And this one is a narrative title. It describes an event, right? And again, storytelling thing. It's not something super advanced, but it's always hard to remember. And this is how you can turn it into competence when you just get used to speaking in these narrative ways. So you can ask your question. Like if you have a headline, you can ask that question. Like, what is the story here? If there's, with the story, you have something going from A to B. And hopefully you can also convey like what actually happened there.
Yep.
And with the simplicity, that's also a great reminder that you always want to be as simple as possible at all times. And sometimes, for example, if the axis was actually there, probably you wouldn't even notice it consciously. But by pointing it out, no, you can actually get rid of it. It's kind of like becomes water to a fish, especially if you work with the numbers and stats all the time. You don't even notice that it's there. But once you remove it, you can see how much slicker the slide becomes and how much easier it will be for you to get them to understand exactly what you want them to see and hear and envision.
Right. Excellent point. And to build on that, right? If my slide, if that graphics headline was just sales by month, I would have to put in the bullets, sales were 10% and then they jumped 50%. And it's like, that's the big aha, whiz bang, like, and that's going to be, I'm basically burying the lead. Or now I'm forced. I mean, in theory, I could maybe even pull this off with no bullets. Just make a big picture and like just talk about it. So, right? In theory, you could try the Petracuccia style. But if you want more analysis, why put the punchline in the analysis? Use the analysis space to actually analyze. You know, what are some of the drivers, right? You can have, or some details. Well, on July 1st, we launched a new product and damn, that thing took off. That would be really cool to have in the commentary. So save some of your ink, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and have that evocative. I love the evocation, the storytelling, and how it's like cropping up in different ways.
And a quick note on that too is that
Yes,
probably a data science pitfall there is that if you work with data all the time, you start to see the stories in the numbers, but it's not true for your audience.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, real good point.
And you get kind of used to it. It's kind of like Neo seeing the Matrix type of thing, but your audience is not in that same world, not on that same level. So it's good to be grounded in these very simple truths about storytelling on that level.
Yeah. I mean, even just recently, and I'm here teaching, training, and I still slip up sometimes because we're, talking about a analysis that we did, a model that we built, and I'm just zipping through all of these different proportions, ratios, percentages, and so on. And in my head, I knew exactly what every single figure and every single bullet meant and how they coalesced into what I thought was this like super exciting story. But it just wasn't gelling. I didn't have the good visual. I probably needed some better visuals and maybe chopping it up into more slides to separate that, because it was starting to get a little bit dense. But that's because, like you said, you get in it, you're like the fish who doesn't know he's wet. I was in there for so long, and I've been looking at these numbers for so much. I mean, I was like telling my wife at night, I was like, "Oh my god, like 32%, 1 in 7, da da da," and she's like, "Sorry," like I was like reciting it in my head. I was so excited about it. So this reminder to go back to simple is not because people are dumb, it's because people are busy, and you need to essentially smooth out the ingestion so that they don't get indigestion. It's a soundbite. I think that's another teacher.
Already marked the clip.
Yeah. And then finally, you've got this idea showcase, right? And this is like the when in doubt, like you don't quite have an analysis, you don't quite have like the heavy commentary like the slide the previous one had. You're not in a process, you're not really using a list, or maybe you've had 2 list slides in a row and you're like, man, if I do one more list slide, they're going to fall asleep. This idea of the idea showcase is just super useful. And so let's talk through that. So this is the ugly version just to show you what the anatomy looks like. You have an icon or a picture. I don't like stock photos. That's an aesthetic decision on my part. I'm not saying that there's no place for them, but I like icons way more than I like stock photos. But use a stock photo. In fact, I think I have some stock photos in here somewhere just because I couldn't get around it. But then you have a box underneath it, and that's just like real simple. So simple. None of these should wrap. Or almost none of these should wrap, okay? Because these are more to remind you of what you're going to say. They are not the same level of depth. We're like, oh, this slide has to stand alone in my absence, like the analysis slide has. So here's what it looks like, okay? So I call them panels. You got a picture and some text, okay? Super easy, super low effort once you kind of get in the habit. Okay, you group them together so you can clone it. You can swap out the picture, right click, change picture. Now you've got another icon in there. Okay, perfect for if you're doing like a TED Talk style or you're broadcasting, you're not expecting a lot of interaction. Or let's say I'm doing a presentation to a whole company, or I'm doing a presentation at a conference. I'm probably going to use a lot of these because it's just like, oh, what did I want to talk about on page 8? Okay, thanks for the reminder. Right? And just a general to like wax philosophical about this kind of stuff. Icons, very, very easy way to add visual interest to a slide that might otherwise be super boring. You don't want to do more than 4 panels per slide. 2 and 3 are probably the best, right? Use your alignment tools, use your distribution tools to keep things nice and aesthetic. You can use, like I said, I'm using animations here, right? Control the flow of information from left to right. We read from left to right, so you want to kind of play into that. And experiment, have some fun with it, right? But like, you know, if you take this and what I've just covered, now I challenge anybody to find a scenario that you can't make a slide for, make a deck for. Right? So this would be like the Pechakucha, or the closest cousin to it, albeit I think there's a place for like a 5th one, which maybe like a single panel. But what do you think of this now that you've seen it?
So it's interesting when you mentioned ideally it's 2 to 4 panels. So I found that over time as well, but something happens beyond 4. So whether we have like pricing options, for example, it can be 2 because it's a binary option. It can be 3. It can even be 4 because it be 4 of them, right? And then you kind of direct to the middle in general. But when you have 5 panels, that just kind of escapes what I can grasp. That's the kind of people almost like give up subconsciously of not even trying to process what's on there. So that just kind of stood out. And I'm a huge fan of the icons. A lot of people are actually against the icons, and then some people are against the stock photos. I fall where you are, that I actually like the icons in general. Something happens when you have an image. And it's not like people will look at the hand, right? Oh, okay, there's a hand. Like, how is the hand? How does that correspond to the text? People don't really make those connections, but for some reason it makes it just easier to process the information on screen. I personally hate stock photos, I think to a fault, because this is just a note that there's something about faces, human faces, that makes it just very powerful if you want to draw attention. I want to pull people into a story. And when I say that I hate stock photos to a fault, that sometimes when we should use stock photos, I was like very resistant and still am often. But I love this idea because with this, you have the images, you have the panels, and exactly what you want to bring about from that, which is like, okay, brainstorming ideas, it just really makes it easy for the brain to get into that mode. So I think you also did that on the root beer example too.
I probably did. I mean, again, these are
Yeah, the
Like, I'm
archetypal.
putting all the tricks out on the table so anybody can just pick them up, use them, and they're going to be building decks, tomorrow, right? It's interesting about why you don't like stock photos. I like them for a completely different reason, or don't like them for a completely different reason. So I find that with icons, they look like they're part of the slide. With stock photos, there's like a very jarring edge. And it like immersion's not the right word, or maybe it is, but it doesn't feel like it's the best word for this, but it's like immersion breaking. Right? Like that 4, the hand with the 4 feels like it's part of the slide. I've recolored it. There's no sharp edge. It's just a picture of a 4. Same thing with that box. Now that box has a lot of sharp edges in theory. And yet it looks like it's part of this deck. If I had a stock photo of a cube, it would have a border. It would have an edge. You would clearly know, okay, this is like a different world. So that's why I don't actually like them, because of that. They don't look organic. They don't look like they're part of the slide.
Yeah, I never knew why I didn't like stock photos. Actually, I just offered like why they are, like, in general can be useful, right? But now that you mentioned it, I think that kind of immersion breaking, I think that's the right way to put it, is why I don't like them either. Just kind of like out of place. It's almost like I'm inviting you on a specific journey. Now we kind of share this kind of made up universe that I created, the fantasy world. And it's like, I don't know, it's like a real person footage showing up in Shrek type of thing. It's like, oh, it just doesn't belong there, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then your point about the number of panels. So I think I haven't read anything that would invalidate this science, so I'm going to quote it as science. But like at a glance, you can recognize without any cognitive processing, I think 1, 2, 3, and maybe 4. After that, you have to count or subgroup. So like 5, your brain's going to go, there's a 3, there's a 2, it's 5. You can't just be like 5, right? And I think that's probably where a lot of these principles of, say, fewer than 4, 2 to 3, 2 to 4, 1 to 4, like I think that's why that comes up a lot, is because there's like Edward Tufte talks a lot about this. It's super fascinating, but like reducing the cognitive burden on your audience. And so if you're forcing them to process anything, they're not processing what you want them to process. So if you put 6 things on page, whether involuntarily, how many of those? Okay, I see 2 groups of 3, 6. Whatever you were just saying while I was doing that is gone.
And probably there's some evolutionary, like how the universe and how
hunting or something, I would bet.
I mean, I don't know. I don't have specifics on this, but mammals have 4 legs type of thing too. It's like kind of inseamed into the world in some way. The 4, 4 legs on a table too. So,
right on. All right, and then this is a play on the last kind of archetype. But there's different scenarios where the panel's not exactly right, but there's some other ways that you can approach it. So this is my key stat archetype. Okay, I've got those 4 stats. Now, if they had their own slide, I would just blow it out. They would take up a ton of real estate. I would use the animations, control the revelation. Those become talking points. Okay, but maybe there's no graphic. Maybe it's just like, hey, we saved 250 hours per week. Like, what am I going to do? Like a bar chart just to have like a bar chart? No, I can just say 250 hours saved per week. 9,000 emails. Like, these are just like garbage stats, right? But the point is that template, we used to use that in consulting all the time, right? Hey, here's like your 1 pager of like cool stats that you can now run away with and update your model. Okay. You're making this incredibly easy to digest, and you're making space to talk about it anytime you need to. Okay. Now, the next one's my favorite by far. Okay. The next one is quoting. Okay. Now watch how this reveals. Editing is the biggest time sink. Nobody likes slides till Dave taught me. I proposed with PowerPoint. Custom UX. I love this guy. I am now the Kobe Bryant of PowerPoint. Okay. But I want to talk about what I'm doing with the animation. So this is typically when I've got quotes, lots of quotes. Again, I don't have a picture per se. I have speech bubbles. But watch how I animated this. 1, then 2, then 3. 1, then 2, then 3. when this occupies an entire slide, and when you take it out to like 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, and keep going, I mean, you may run out of quotes, you may run out of real estate, but you create this impression, again, visual storytelling it's like an avalanche of feedback. Okay. See, people use this all the time in documentaries, movies, whenever they want to try to do something with like something's happening, like drip, 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 drip. Right? It's that feeling of like the rainstorm, the blizzard, the flood, whatever. You can do that. You can control that. And this is effortless. I made my speech bubbles. I laid them out on the slide. And then I'm kind of zigging and zagging the animation, but it's just 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4. Maybe stop at 4. That's 10 total quotes, right? But it's building momentum. So if you're going to use like a what we heard slide, or here's the evidence I got, and you do that, that's going to give you this massive tailwind to your punchline, whether it's tombstone or whether it's the next slide. You'll be like, oh man, people love this training. Look, oh my God, bang. And then it's like, and you can have it too for whatever, $5.99.99, right? So it just gives you that little ramp into whatever you're going for. So these are just variations of the panel slide, right? So stat highlight reel, no pictures, no icons. I kind of made icons by using the numbers there. And then the speech bubbles, which are their own icons in a way. But the secret sauce there is you want to accelerate the revelation so that you get that momentum.
And I think it kind of, I love this, like the quotes part, because it also draws on something that everyone knows, which is the speech bubble, the comic book, something like the archetypal. We've all read that before. We've all seen that before. So when you see this pop up, your brain is already creating almost like the visual behind it, the person actually saying it. And then popping up, it's not just the, hey, and there's more effect, which is very real. But also, I think this is how it would happen in real life too. It's like, one voice here, one person there. So it's very good storytelling.
And not only that, but if you know you're trying to make this slide, I guarantee you it's going to make you a better listener during a discovery session.
Mm.
When I had a sales rep tell me that my prospecting app was like Disneyland for sales reps, that immediately was the soundbite that I played at every meeting. I'm like, hey, don't take it from me. Take it from, I think it was Mike over in California. Mike loves it. He called it Disneyland. Right?
And in the TDS community, this is also a soundbite now after you. Yeah,
exactly. Or when I had another guy who just was like, hey, real quick, I love it. I was like, okay. Oh, that's a camera. Oh, you get what I mean? That's going into the soundbite. And you just have that as like, imagine having a full clip and it's just like, here we go. I'm going to empty the clip with all of the stuff from here. And it could go the other way too if you're trying to build negativity. But positivity is more fun. These are archetypes. This is how you make all your slides. And then, as we're kind of closing out this session about just building slides, right? There's a couple other tricks that, again, you add this, it takes very, very little effort, and suddenly your slide game is just that much higher. So the first thing I want to cover is the Monopoly card. Okay, it's literally named after the game Monopoly. Big shout out to Hasbro. Thank you for such a wonderful board game.
We'll tag them.
If Wizards of the Coast is listening, I love Magic the Gathering too, but also owned by Hasbro. But the Monopoly card, that's what it looks like. It's got that colored ribbon at the top, and then it's got the little bit of content. So if you're doing panels, or if you have boxes, or if you're doing like an org chart or whatever, like if you're going to have a box, you could use a Monopoly card. It's just a small adjustment that makes the slide more visually interesting. And also because you've created an object, you can animate them. The fancy version, which a person who used to work for me, her name's Meenal, she came up with this. I thought this was absolutely fantastic. I use these a lot more than I use the original Monopoly card. I think these look really cool. It's the same as the Monopoly card, same construction, except you shrink the ribbon and you kind of offset it, and then you use a dotted line border. So it gives this just a different vibe. I find that just very interesting to look at. I thought they looked great. And so, shout out to Meenal for that innovation. But now I'm elevating it so that everybody who wants to hear me talk about PowerPoint can learn from Meenal. So those are Monopoly cards. Again, little visual flourishes that allow your slide to be more interesting. And then you've seen me use these all over the place. Dividers. Okay. The slide is a map. The slide is a terrain. You want to own the terrain. So dividers help to move things along, show relationships, control the flow of information, control the visual of the eye. So there's 3 that I use. The chevron, that's the one to the left, that skinny guy. That's just the easiest, simplest, smallest way to say we're going from left to right, sir, or right to left, or up to down, whatever. It's fairly efficient space-wise, and it gets a lot of job done. The triangle does the same thing. Okay, we're moving along with the triangle, but the triangle has gravity that the chevron doesn't. If the chevron is like whimsical, it's the Kobe, agile. The triangle is your Shaq. Okay, that's just like, okay, we cannot go back. The triangle has moved us to the right. We cannot go. There's the point of no return. So typically, I'll use triangles to denote like a final step. Or like a point at which, like I said, you can't go back. And then dotted lines are just arbitrary. They're the fences. Okay, I want to visually break something up. I'm going to use a dotted line. Why dotted lines? They convey division without intruding into the visual field. It's a very interesting thing. If you take any slide, or anyone who's doing this, like take a slide, divide it in half horizontally with a solid line, and then look at the slide. Your eye gets like stuck on it. You can't get off of it. Switch it to dotted. It falls to the background. You've done nothing different except turn it into a dotted line. I don't fully understand why this works. I just know that it does. It allows your dividers to exist without becoming the thing that people look at. And they're always gray. Now my slides for this are gray. I'm experimenting with different color patterns or color palettes rather. So I'm using gray, but generally you want them to be gray anyway, because again, they should never dominate the visual field. You don't want the dividers to be more important than the content that they are dividing, of course. So these are the dividers. Again, they don't really fit into any of the archetypes per se, but they're in every single one pretty much.
Yeah, super important tools, and especially like this whole idea of the dividing and creating some boundaries in your presentation cannot be overstated. And I think actually the gray is a great choice there. So especially if your text is black, it just kind of puts that in the background. Exactly. A little bit. And it's a good question why it works like that, especially the dotted line, why it has that effect as opposed to the solid line.
There's probably like an evolutionary reason, like solid versus dot. I don't know. I know that I learned that from Tufty, but I don't recall the reason. He did not. I know that he gave occipital vibration like a lot of airspace, so like I'm never going to forget that one. And I'll talk about how to avoid occipital vibration in a couple of slides. But that's one that he's like used dotted lines, and then he moved on. I was like, but why, Professor? But maybe his seminar covers.
Maybe we'll do an interview with him and we'll find out.
Get him on here.
The reasons behind this.
But let's land the plane here and call it session 1. Because we've got a tiny bit more aesthetics, and then we're going to talk about how to Voltron this stuff together into an effective fighting machine.
I love this and really appreciate this, sir. I mean, I've heard a lot about this and we talked around it, but I love that this was like weapons grade PowerPoint knowledge. And I think after this, everyone should be ready to embark on their journey and go from either unskilled or average to good, to very good, to great. Hopefully not too far so that we don't get into the diminishing returns state. But this was fantastic, and I can see how years and years and years of practice and experience and battle scars went into it.
Yeah, and what was that, 60 minutes?
Yeah, but I mean...
And
More like 70, but that's to be expected.
Sure. So like, I guess the point is like people like so many people can tune into this, give it an hour, maybe do it once or twice, maybe 3 times, but then, you know, their PowerPoint mechanics are going to be so much better, and there's no more writer's block. There's no more unguided. I don't know what to do. I got to make a deck for a meeting tomorrow, and I don't know what to do. Like now you do. Now you know what to do. You know exactly how to take the 4 archetypes. There's no corporate scenario that doesn't fit into one of those 4 boxes. Now you can spin it up. And I'll talk a little bit more about like reusing slides so that you go even faster as you get more of this. But that's the power of aiming for 60%. This is the 60th percentile for pretty much anybody, any organization. Even if you're at McKinsey, you're probably going to be able to get, wow, this guy's actually pretty good. He just started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from that point on, that's going beyond it, gets into the graphic designer territory. So this is a fantastic 80-20, and then we'll pick it up from right here on the next session.
Right on, man.
All right. Thank you, sir, and I'll see you there.
All right.